Amen. I'm going to try to tie up some loose ends that we've had in the studies that we've been doing. We've been looking at the concept, the word, dispensation, dispensationalism. Depending on whom you ask, this word means different things. So to one person it can mean one thing, to another person it can mean something else. The word itself is found 4 times in the scriptures, gave you the references for that, all by Paul. 1 Corinthians once, the book of Ephesians twice, the book of Colossians once. 4 times. Ellen White uses this word frequently. We saw how she used this word, and what we did was we could see how we could take that word dispensation and use it interchangeably with the word age. We went to a reference in Great Controversy, page 343, paragraph 1. It says, from age to age. And you can understand that to mean from dispensation to dispensation. And the way she uses that phrase there is to show that history repeats and has striking similarities. Often when she uses this concept of dispensation, she speaks about the Jewish dispensation and the Christian dispensation. She'll use it in different terms, like the Old Testament and the New. She'll say the Old and the New in various ways. Also, she uses the word dispensation within what we would call the gospel dispensation or the Christian dispensation. She will say the gospel dispensation began in one way, and in this age, in this time period, it looks or feels or has some different characteristics. So you can see that she's going to use the word dispensation or age within the history of Christianity, marking the beginning and the end. We saw that in Acts of the Apostles, the Spirit Prophecy book, chapter 5, beginning page 47 to 55. We didn't read those passages, but if you review them, you'll see that's what she does. She'll take the Christian time period and she'll show you how dispensations run through that history. Now, people seem to be concerned about the word dispensation. I say people, Future for America, those people who have left the movement, they seem to have a concern. I could say I'm not sure why they have this concern, but I think I have a feel or some kind of understanding of why they do. But I wanted us to be comfortable that the concept is well established in inspiration. Just the fact of Revelation, chapter 2 and 3, the 7 churches. So the 7 churches are 7 time periods, 7 ages, or 7 dispensations of the Christian church. When we spoke about that, we can compare and contrast the Christian dispensation or the spiritual church with the literal church, the Jews and the Gentiles, the Christian church, the Jewish church. And if you can have 7 dispensations in the Christian church, you can also have 7 in the Jewish dispensation. And that's what we did here. You can show that there are 7 dispensations of the church's experience, and therefore there would be 7 in that history too, or that dispensation. And the reason why that becomes significant is because you can see in the time of Christ, that is the church of Laodicea. It's the church that's going to come under judgment. And in that history, before they come into judgment, in fact, the mechanism or the means by which that judgment is brought to the church is through a movement, a group of people that come out of that church and turn their attention upon the faults, the failings, the woes of that church. This is the movement of Ephesus. This is John the Baptist, the disciples, whether it's the 12, the 70, the 120, whether it's Paul. All of that is happening in conjunction with the history of Laodicea. Those 2 churches overlap. Once you can take that model, and we follow the principle found in Isaiah 28, line upon line, then you can take the history of Christ and you can bring it to the end of the world. Because the history of Christ is the end of the Jewish dispensation, and we are now living in the end of the Christian dispensation. So that's a symbol of the Jewish church in which Christ lives, and this is a symbol of the church or the time period in which we live. We understand that we're Laodicea, the seventh and the last church. So if you take this and see it's a parallel history to our history, then you know in our church we should expect a coming out of our church, which we would call Ephesus. And this is the story of Daniel chapter 2. This is how dispensationalism works. So the problem with this idea is that the words that we use, other people share those same words. Some of those people are good, some of those people are bad. Not morally good or morally bad, doctrinally good and doctrinally bad. So if there were a group of people, some religion, some Eastern religion, that used the word dispensation, would that mean that if we use the same word, that we were then imbibing or following their doctrinal beliefs? We've already gone through this before in our movement with the word fractal. That's what we were accused of by people from this movement who have now left, that we were borrowing what is a mathematical term, and New Age people take that mathematical term and use it to explain their ideology, their theology. And we too are going to take that word to understand and explain our ideology, our theology. Because we're using a common word, the accusation that's leveled against this movement is that we must have gone into spiritualism, because only spiritualists use the word or apply the word fractals to explain what's going on in the life of their movement or in the life of the individual. We know that is foolishness, and the same issue is happening now with the concepts of dispensationalism. So I just want to do a quick review of this word as it's used in the New Testament. We're all familiar with Strong's and Thayer's, hopefully. They're just essentially dictionaries. They're dictionaries that take you from one language to another. They help you to manage the Greek language and bring it into something that's more familiar to us, the English language. So just think of them as dictionaries. They're two people. One is called Mr. Strong and the other one is called Mr. Thayer. They wrote these dictionaries. People call them lexicons. It's just another fancy word for dictionary. And it, as I say, it goes from one language to another. So what theologians have done is they've taken all these words that are in the scriptures and they've given them numbers. The Old Testament Hebrew words have all got numbers. They start with 1 and they go all the way to a couple of thousand. And in the New Testament, the Greek have got the same numbering system. The Old Testament, they're Hebrew words, so they have a prefix of H, so it'd be H1, H2. The Greek, you can guess it's going to be G1, G2, etc. So the word dispensation in the New Testament is G, Greek, number 3,622. So it's 3622. That's what that word is. If you've got some portable electronic device, whether it's a computer or a phone, you can download software that helps you access that, and it will tell you what G3622 is, what the definition is. You can go to two different dictionaries, the Dictionary of Strong and the Dictionary of Thayer. Hopefully that's reasonably clear if you've never done that before. So if we were to look at the word dispensation, obviously it's the Greek word, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. All it means, depending on who you ask, Strong or Thayer, it means administration. It's the administration of a household or an estate. Think about it as a farm. So you have this farm and you're going to have to administer the farm or take hold of it. You've all heard of the biblical word householder. There was a householder of a farm. That's what this word dispensation means. Specifically, it's talking about a religious phenomena, but you can understand it also in a secular framework, which is the householder or someone who owns an estate, a farm, a plantation, depending on how you want to think about it. That's Strong's definition. If you look at Thayer's definition, what he's going to do is refine that understanding, and he's going to say it's not just someone who runs the farm, it's actually the manager, the officer, or the overseer. So it's some hired person who's going to manage the farm, or what we would call the household, or the estate. So there's this estate, there's a house, it's got land, it's a big project. So the owner is going to get some hired help, a manager or an overseer, to deal with the oversight or the administration of this venture. That's what the word dispensation means. It means the management, the oversight, the administration of someone else's property. Now, if you heard that that was the definition of dispensation, it might be different to what you thought dispensation meant. Because I'm pretty sure that most of you think dispensation means a period of time. That's what most people think dispensation means. But I don't know if in this country you have this term. I'll explain what the term is. Dispensation comes from the word dispense. So if I were to ask you what it means to dispense, you know that's nothing to do with a period of time. Dispensing means to give out something, doesn't it? Back where I come from, you get a pharmacist and they're called dispensing pharmacists, as opposed to other types of pharmacists. You know, someone who works in a chemical company, they wouldn't be dispensing pharmacists. The ones who dispense are the ones that give out the medication. So dispensation comes from the word to dispense or to give out. And so that's where you can see that this idea of dispensation, as it comes from this Greek word, means to have oversight of this estate or this household, to manage it, to deal with it, to hand out instructions, if you can conceptualize it that way. Dispensation, dispense. Now this word comes from two other Greek words, so it's a compound word. Before we get to the compound word, it comes from another word, which is 3623. So we just looked at 3622. Its next door neighbor is 3623. And this is very similar. It means a household distributor, household manager, someone who distributes the work, gives some instruction, manager, overseer, etc. An employer or an employee. It also can figuratively mean a preacher of the gospel. So the word dispensation is someone who's a manager, an administrator of a household, but it can also mean someone who is a preacher. So there's this person who's going to now administer or hand out or dispense what? The gospel, because he's a preacher or she. Thayer gives a very similar definition. It's metaphorically an apostle or a Christian teacher or an overseer of God's church. So now we've gone from a farm to the household of God, which is the church. So the household of God, the church, is going to be administered by apostles, leaders, elders, bishops, etc. And if you went to Matthew chapter 10, where Christ says, I make you, he didn't say I make you, he says, go and look after or search out the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So from that story, we know that the people who look after sheep are shepherds. We could go to Jeremiah 23, and we could see the problem in the church is that the existing shepherds have scattered the flock, and God says, what I'm going to do is fire you. Use the word fire to make someone lose their job, get rid of them, and I'm going to hire new shepherds. We would call them under shepherds or hirelings. So there's this concept of pastors, elders, who are hired by the boss to look after the sheep, or in the case that we're considering, the church of God. That's what dispensation means. It can also mean someone who is going to take over or look after the children of the family. So there's the parents. They've got a big project, they're too busy. So what they would do is they would hire or purchase a slave, this manager, and the job function of that servant or slave would actually be to bring up the children. This is not a wet nurse. This is someone who's going to have total oversight of the welfare of these children from birth to adulthood. We would say 18. From 0 to 18, the person who's going to look after that child would be the servant. They could administer punishment. They could give gifts. The total control, whether it's a stick or a carrot, is in the hands of this servant. It's not in the hands of the parents. The parents give that work to these servants. And once a child comes of age, then they take over the family business and they become the supervisor or the boss of that servant. They switch roles. All of that imagery is the imagery of slavery that's brought to view in the New Testament that Paul uses in some of his illustrations. You can see that in the imagery of Galatians chapter 4 when it talks about a schoolmaster. So that schoolmaster is a very similar definition to dispensation. All I want us to see is that the word dispensation is not what you might think it is. The way we commonly use it is from age to age, time period to time period. And why we use that is because what we want to portray, in fact, when I say we, it's not, I didn't invent this, this is the way the word is used, is that the way the household is managed from one period to another changes. That's why you get from age to age, from dispensation to dispensation, the gospel dispensation, Christian dispensation, or the Jewish dispensation. It's how the household is going to be managed. The management of the household changes from one period to another. All of us know this. We know that the Jewish dispensation, or the age of the Jews, works and operates. The management of that household is different than it is in the Christian dispensation. If you weren't sure about that, you could go to Hebrews chapter 7. In Hebrews chapter 7, what does Paul say? One of his powerful arguments, he says that there must be a change in the law. The reason there needs to be a change in the law is because who are the only people that can become priests? Men and the tribe of Levi. So he's going to say that rule must be broken and done away with, destroyed. There must be a change in the law. There must be a new dispensation, a new age. Now, the priests are after the order of Melchizedek. You become a priest not based upon who your parents are, but upon your own standing, your own relationship with God. And your children cannot be priests. We might say your children cannot be Christians just because you are. We know how that works. Most of us know children, either personally or we've heard about them, that have been lost and their parents were faithful Christians. The ultimate or classic or the original story is Adam and Eve. They were faithful parents, good parents, and their firstborn son was lost. The secondborn son was saved. It's not about the management of the parents. You can't make your child a Christian. They have to make that choice for them. That is the concept or the idea of the priesthood of Melchizedek, unlike the priesthood of Aaron, because the priesthood of Aaron introduces corruption into a system, doesn't it? We know that. Just look at Eli's sons. Eli's sons were corrupt men, but they were groomed to be priests, not because they were good. It's because they had a certificate, a birth certificate that said, our dad is Eli, therefore that makes us fit to be priests. One of them would have become the high priest if they hadn't both died. So you can go right down to the next step. So we've gone the word dispensation, we've taken it down 3 layers. We went from layer 1. The coding of that was 63:22. Then we went to 63:23. And now we're going to go to 63:24. We've gone down 3 layers. And now this word is going to be broken down into 2. It's a compound word. 63:24, all that means is a house or a household. So we already defined that. But there's another word that's attached to that, which is 35:51. So I just want to give the structure that we've just seen here. So this word here is dispensation. As given in the New Testament, it's found in 4 places. It comes from the Greek word 3622, which itself comes from this word G3623, which comes from these 2 words. So this is a compound word, as is this, and this means house. That's why we get householder. Hopefully that makes sense. The other word, which is 35:51, this one here, this has an interesting meaning. This means to parcel out or to give out, to give something to someone. Often it can mean if you give food to someone, or it can mean that you have some animals, and what you're going to do is you're going to tell your animals to go and graze in this part of the field or this part of the land. You're going to parcel out the grazing of the animals. So you can see where the word dispensation comes from the word dispense. So the householder, the one who's in charge of the house, is going to dispense or give out instructions, whether it could be food to someone or whether it could be to the livestock. So I want to see how we build up this word. Now, if you look at the other definition, it can also mean law, generally a regulation, specifically the law of Moses, or figuratively a principle. So you're going to hand out something, you're going to dispense something, and we have a few options. It's law, principle, or regulation. So it can be Moses' law, or it can be laws that are established in the history of the Christian dispensation. So let's summarize. The word dispensation, the way we use it, means from one age to another age. It comes from the word to dispense, which means to give out. So you've got a manager who's in charge of a farm, an estate, it's a large estate, so large that the owner cannot manage it or take care of it himself. So he has hired servants to do that work for him. He's going to give out instruction. He's going to feed the other servants. He's going to tell the flock where they can graze and where they cannot graze. They're going to parcel out information. So all of that is what this word dispensation means. But if you take it to its foundational understanding, it means a house, and it means a law or principle or regulation. It can be either Moses or Christ or Christian dispensation. And so when you combine this, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about Moses being faithful in his household, as Christ was faithful in his household. If you take those 2 people, it actually says that Christ was better than Moses. Why was Christ better than Moses? Because Christ owned the house, and Moses was just a worker in the house. So it talks about this whole principle there when you see the relationship between Christ and Moses. All I want us to see that the word dispensation means that you've got a house or a church, the household of God, and it's run or governed by laws or principles or regulations. And those laws, principles, and regulations can change depending on the situation that you find yourself in. Clearly in the definition, it can either be the laws or regulations of Moses or the laws and regulations of the Christian era. So that's what dispensation means. It's not an ugly word, it's a benign word that is really easy to understand. Now, we've been accused that we're now into dispensationalism. So you've got dispensation, they're going to put an ism at the end of this. And this is the accusation that's being leveled against us, that we believe dispensationalism is a valid approach to Scripture. So ask yourself the question, don't get tangled up in what other people might think dispensationalism is, but from what we've understood from inspiration, from the dictionary definitions of what dispensationalism is, the accusation that's leveled against us, that we believe dispensationalism is a valid approach to Scripture. So ask yourself the question, do you believe that? Do you believe that the dispensation of Christ was different to the dispensation in which we live? The rules and regulations are different. Christ was circumcised. You're forbidden from being circumcised. Christ, when he was born, his parents had to make animal sacrifices. Paul was willing to go through the Nazirite vow and had his hair shaven. All these rules and regulations are no longer binding to us. In fact, you're forbidden to do many of those things. So we could go through so many examples. Is the concept that we're living under different rules and regulations valid or invalid? An example that we're all familiar with, Sister Tess read to us, Early Writings, page 74. This was written in 1850, in November. And all I want us to say is, she says that the Lord has instructed her that he's about to gather his people the second time. So I'm just going to put G for gather, and he wants to gather his people the second time. The date is 1850. He's about to gather his people the second time. He's going to gather them the second time. That means he must have gathered them the first time. So here he was, he gathered the people the first time, and then she says, the Lord is not going to deal with us now, in this gathering, in the same way that he dealt with us in the scattering. So before this gathering, God's people, the way God was managing them, the management was in a time of scattering. So I'm going to put scattering here. And if that was a second gathering, there would have been a second scattering. And therefore you would have had the first scattering. So she already set this model up, this timeline for you. I'll just put some dates. You're all familiar with them. This is 1798. This scattering here is the 1260, which is half of the 2520. 2520 is a scattering. This gathering is 46 years, and this is 1844. So this is what God wanted to do. So it's clear that she says the rules and regulations of how God is going to manage his household is different today than it was before. And if it's different now than it was before, and this is the second time he's going to do this, then this time period or these rules and regulations must be the same as these rules and regulations. And therefore these rules and regulations must be the same as these ones. She says, if you look to the same rules, the same regulations that were being employed here and bring them into this history, what will not happen? You cannot be gathered. Because the way God's going to deal with these people now, what is their experience going to be? They're going to be scattered. That's how the dynamic works. The relationship works, that they're going to be scattered. And if God was to interact with you and I in the same way today, what would happen to us? We would remain scattered. So therefore, there are going to be new dynamics, a new way of dealing with us, new laws, new principles, new regulations. So this is a classic quote that deals with dispensationalism. The rules and regulations change from one era to another, and all of this is in the Millerite history. So in the Millerite history, you have different dispensations. This is nothing new or crazy. So this is what we're being accused of. This teaches that God provides a message for each dispensation, which is solely for that generation, and must not be understood as speaking the same message to us. So this is where they're going to start twisting what we say. Now I want to throw out some terms to you. One of them is obviously dispensationalism. One of them is the historical critical method. The other one is the historical grammatical critical method. We could go to futurism, preterism. There are all these isms, all these ways of understanding Scripture. And it's really easy when someone talks about going into the Bible. So you can turn there if you like. Habakkuk chapter 1 and 2. Habakkuk chapter 1 and 2. Now, if you were to go to the Great Controversy, Ellen White's going to quote from this book. And what she's going to say is the following. The Millerites, they were fixated by one prophecy. What was the prophecy that they were fixated on? Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. The 2300 days. It's not the 2520. They do not have a fixation about that prophecy. They use it, they employ it, just like they do the 1290, the 1335. In fact, the 1335, 2520, and 2300 days are the three key prophecies that are given. In fact, they're all on this chart here. They're the three that are really given. The 1335 is here, the 2300 days here, and the 2520 is here. They're the three major prophecies for the Millerite movement, but the one that they focus on is the 2300 days. That is the pillar and foundation of the Millerite movement. So when Ellen White speaks about these charts, this one in particular, not this one, she says when they produced that chart, it was a fulfillment of Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2. I'll read it to you. For the, 2 verse 2. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. We've read this before. She says the fulfillment of that was this chart. This was getting the vision and making it plain upon tables. And the vision that's being referred to is what vision? It's the 2300 day vision. That's what's being referred to here. We know that because a few short years later, because this chart is produced here in 1842, in 1850 they're going to produce another chart, which is this one. And they're going to make a major correction. Can you see the year 1844? You can see here it's 1843, wherever you look. It's always 1843. This is the 1843 chart. They're going to make a correction because what they know is that there was one prophecy that got changed. Daniel 8:14 got shifted from 1843 to 1844. So the correction of that date is a correction of their understanding of Daniel 8:14. We should all understand this. And we know that's the case because if you go to the history of October the 23rd and you go to Hiram Edson, he's going to have a vision in a cornfield on the morning after the disappointment. And what's he going to see? The sanctuary. And what's he going to see about the sanctuary? That the sanctuary is now being cleansed, that Christ has moved from one apartment to the other. This is an understanding or explanation of what portion of Scripture? It's not Leviticus 26. is Daniel 8:14. And this leads them to review what happened in their past experience, this scattering period from 44 to 50, whereby they're going to make this new chart after they've sorted out their problems. They're going to change to 1844. And it says the 2300 days and administration of Christ in the holy terminate in 1844. This is Daniel 8:14, the 2300-day prophecy. It's not the 2520. This movement has a huge misunderstanding of what the 2520 is, how we're supposed to handle it, and how Ellen White handles that prophecy. And what we do is what we do consistently with Spirit of Prophecy quotes. We manipulate. GC 351. Great Controversy, page 351. We manipulate that passage to make it sound or say what we want it to say. My purpose isn't to go into that story, but what I want us to see is that the way the Millerites and Ellen White commenting on the Millerite history, which she rubber stamps and approves, she says in Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 2, that vision that's been made plain upon tables is this vision here, this one here, which is Daniel 8:14. And the question is that correct? And the obvious answer is no, it's not correct. All you need to do is read Habakkuk chapter 1 and understand Habakkuk 1 verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. What do prophets see? They see visions. So the vision of chapter 1, we know what that is. If you go down to verse 5, what is the vision that he's going to see? Begins in verse 5. God's going to do a miracle. What's the miracle he's going to do when you see across the geopolitical realm? He's going to see that the Babylonian Empire is going to rise up from obscurity. Why would that be a miracle? Because it's an impossibility for the Babylonian people. I call them an empire. They're not an empire. They're a two-bit group of people. There's no way that they're going to rise to power because someone is stopping them. Who is that? It's the Assyrians. It's not the Egyptians, it's the Assyrians. The Assyrians, their next door neighbors, are stopping the Babylonians from rising to supremacy. So a miracle is going to happen. The Battle of Carchemish, the Babylonians are going to destroy or do away with the Assyrians, and they're going to come to the ascendancy. It's a miracle that's happened. That's what Habakkuk is prophesying. Verse 6, it tells you what the prophecy is. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, and it tells you what their nature is or what their property is. God is going to allow the Chaldeans, which is another word for the Babylonians, to rise up, to become the de facto superpower of the world. This is not overcoming Egypt. This is overcoming Assyria. Assyria had put the Babylonians essentially in prison, not literally, of course. They'd constrained and restrained that people so they could never rise to supremacy. But a miracle is going to happen. That is what the vision that Habakkuk is seeing in chapter 1. And if you go from verse 7 onward to verse 11, it tells you what they're going to do. When they rise up, the focus of attention after they've risen up, and to rise up means to what? It means to destroy your enemies. Who are your enemies? The Assyrians, the Egyptians, and everyone else that gets in your way. Who is the focus of their attention going to be after they've dealt with their enemies? If you were to read from verse 7 onwards, if you read carefully, contextually, what you will see is that it's God's people, the Israelites. They become the focus of attention. And the reason they become the focus of attention is found in verses 2, 3, and 4. In verses 2, 3, and 4 of chapter 1, God's people are committing sin. And the complaint is that God is not dealing with the sin. So what will God do? He'll answer the prayer and he'll say, I'll deal with the sin problem. How will God deal with sin? He's going to raise up the Chaldeans to punish God's church. raising up of the nation, which is in itself a miracle, has to happen by destroying the geopolitical rivals. So first they deal with the rivals, and then they're going to deal with God's church. This is the story of Nebuchadnezzar, the story of Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, those kings, which is the subjugation of God's people, culminating in destruction of the city and the temple by Nebuchadnezzar. That's what's being portrayed in the book of Habakkuk. Now, when this was written, the book of Habakkuk, the Chaldeans had not risen. The Assyrians are the superpower. Who would believe anyone saying that? No one would believe that. That would be like us saying today, America is the de facto superpower, and Mozambique, nothing wrong with Mozambique, they're going to rise up to supremacy and they're going to do away with the United States, and they're going to be the de facto superpower. And then what they're going to do is they're going to come and deal with Seventh-day Adventists. How many of you would believe that? None of you. Why would you not believe that, by the way? Because you would say, prophecy doesn't teach that. So it's not just the fact that you can't believe that this little two-bit nation is going to overcome, and don't say it in a disrespectful way, overcome the United States, who are the superpower of the world. It's not because they can't believe it could happen. With God, all things are possible. It's because we have prophecy that we believe shows that that cannot happen. And that's part of their argument that they have. They've got Old Testament, for them, Old Testament, which is the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, which show them they're going to be a glorious people. They've got Isaiah to show all of this, that it's not going to turn out this way. Everything's going to be good. So they have prophetic arguments to show why this is not going to be the case. All of these need to be considered when we understand the book of Habakkuk. So, having discussed chapter 1, the church is in sin. God's going to raise up a nation to punish them. The nation that he will rise up is not an existing superpower. The first miracle he'll do is have them destroy their rivals, and then they're going to turn their attention upon God's people. No one will believe it. So in chapter 2, God says, you know what you need to do? Because this is, I'm going to say around 100 years, maybe 60 years, 50 to 100 years in the future, when this is going to begin to be fulfilled, God's going to say, you know what you need to do? You need to write this prophecy down. That's what Habakkuk 2 verse 2 is. It says, get this vision about the Babylonians coming to destroy God's church and write it down so no one's going to make mistakes. No one's going to forget it. That's what the vision is. It has nothing to do with the 2300-day prophecy, because the 2300-day prophecy has got to do with the Persians, which come down here. It's not to do with the Babylonians. Totally different history. So, that's enough about Habakkuk. I want to come back to the accusation. We teach that God provides a message for each dispensation which is solely for that generation and must not be understood as speaking the same message to us. So I want to ask you, just a cursory review of Habakkuk chapter 1 and chapter 2. It should be clear what the vision is of Habakkuk chapter 2. Habakkuk chapter 2, the vision of this is dealing with the rise of the Babylonians and the punishment of God's people, God's church, which is the destruction of Jerusalem and its eventual 70-year captivity. And if you go to Habakkuk afterwards, it explains the release from captivity. That's what Habakkuk's dealing with. It's dealing with that punishment. The Millerites are going to take that story and they're going to change it. They're going to turn the vision not into this vision of the Babylonians rising up, but they're going to turn it into 2300-day prophecy. They do the same thing with Ezekiel chapter 12, by the way. Ezekiel chapter 12 is the same prophecy that's being dealt with here, but Ezekiel happens around 40, 50 years later, but he's dealing with the same issue, the rise of the Babylonians, the destruction of God's church. And the Millerites are going to take that passage and turn it into the 2300-day prophecy. So is it incorrect to say this? This teaches that God provides a message for each dispensation, the Jewish dispensation here, talking about the Babylonian captivity, which is solely for that generation. The book of Habakkuk is solely for that generation. We agree with that accusation that they're levying against us. And then they say, and must not be understood as speaking the same message to us. So this is where they begin to twist and manipulate what we say. Not just what we say, what Ellen White says, what all the prophets say when they go and use previous inspiration. Paul will use this phrase, it is written, back in the Old Testament, and he applies it to his own dispensation. Ellen White does that, we do that. What we should be saying, what I'm saying, and I believe it to be true, which they're saying is gross darkness, gross error, is you take this literal story and you make a spiritual application of that. Ellen White did that. She turned this prophecy of the Babylonian captivity and turned it into 2300-day prophecy by making this table, let me rephrase that, of turning the book of Habakkuk, which was this table that the prophet is going to be written on, turning that into the 1843 chart. You turn the book of Habakkuk into the 1843 chart. If I were to ask you that as a regular Adventist, could you do that? I've got a little booklet here with some charts in it, and I'm going to say, I'm going to turn the book of Isaiah, and I'm going to turn it into this chart. This chart's got nothing to do with the book of Isaiah. You'd say, that's crazy to do that. You'd say, I have no right to do that. But that's exactly what the Millerites do. They take a Bible book, a specific portion of it, admittedly, and turn it into a chart. Ellen White puts her endorsement on that, and I'm saying, if she says that, I accept it. And more than that, I understand the principle of what they're doing, the mechanism behind it, the rules and regulations. So what we're being accused of is an invalid statement. It's an invalid accusation. They're mixing truth and error. Some of the things that they're saying that I teach, that we teach, is correct. Some of the things are not. So when they say must not be understood as speaking the same message to us, I'm saying you can take this book and you can make an application not only to Ellen White's day, but also to our day and age. You can for sure do that. Then they say, God's interaction with each particular dispensation is unique to that generation and has no bearing on dispensations that follow. So you can see, this is repeat and enlarge what they're doing. The first part is correct. Who would argue, if I put a full stop, God's interaction with each particular dispensation is unique to that generation, full stop? Who would say that that's error? Of course that's correct. The way God deals with the Jews is not the same way he deals with the Gentiles, not the same way he deals with the Christians. The way God deals with God's church here in the history of Thyatira, is that the same way he deals with his church in the history of Sardis? Of course it's not. We have a spirit prophecy that says that. Early writings, page 74. God's going to deal with you here differently than he dealt with you here. If he didn't deal with you differently, what would happen? There'd be no change. Therefore, there would be no salvation. So to argue that God's dealing with humanity is unique in each dispensation, of course that's true. But then they say, has no bearing on dispensations that follow. That's the lie, that's the error. Of course they do. The way God deals with his people in this dispensation, does it have a bearing upon this dispensation? Of course it does. There is no one who says that that is the case. So what they're doing is, which is what they like to do, give a message that's half true and half false, half right and half wrong. It's a consistent methodology that they have begun to use from around the beginning of this year. And we should all know, you go back to the original story of Satan in the Garden of Eden, does he tell the truth, speaking to Eve? Yes. Does he tell lies? Yes. It's a combination of truth and error. Half lies, half truth, half wrong, half right. When people start using that methodology, you know it's a satanic message. Everybody, even FFA, if you go and see what they're teaching, they will state one fact, that Satan will never do what? Teach 100% what? He will never teach 100% error. Why? Because no one would believe it. So the hallmark of this, if Satan doesn't teach 100% error, we've got two people, Satan and God. So can Satan teach 100% error? No. Can God teach 100% error? No, he can't. So there's 100% error. I'll put E for error. Can Satan do that? No. We'll try God. Can God do that? No. So no one can teach 100% error. So here we're going to have truth. Can Satan teach 100% truth? No, he can't, because if he did, he'd be like God. Can God teach 100% truth? Yes. So can Satan teach error and truth mixed together? We'll do 50-50. Yes. Can God do 50-50? No. So the only option is, you can see how that works, anybody that teaches half right and half wrong, who are they following? It's Satan. You can't teach all error. You can't teach half right, half wrong. You have to teach this. Ask yourself this question. If I said to you, I'm going to accuse you of this, I'm going to accuse you of believing this. Dispensation is valid. Do you assent to that? Will you say, yep, I 100% believe that dispensation is valid approach to Scripture? We just proved it here. They want to use the word dispensationalism because they've got an angle to do. Satan's always got an angle. He's always got a way of manipulating things. But the word dispensation is valid. We all agree? Of course, it's 100% correct. You're on this side. This teaches that God provides a message for each dispensation, which is for that dispensation, for that generation. Is that 100% true? Of course. He gave a message to the patriarchs. He gave a message to Adam. He gave a message to Aaron, to Christ, to John. They're all different messages. Is the message of John the same as the message that Isaiah had? Of course it's not the same, it's a different message. John's message is the Messiah is about to come. Not about to come, in fact he says what? The time is fulfilled. Isaiah's not saying that. Isaiah's not saying that the time is fulfilled, that Messiah's here. They have different messages. This teaches that God provides a message for each dispensation which is unique. Do you believe that? Of course you do. All of us believe that. They don't believe that. They don't believe that's true. So we're going to say, yes, that's a correct explanation of what we believe. And then they're going to say what we also believe, which is solely for that generation and must not be understood as speaking about us or people in the future. Do we believe that? No. You know that the story of Christ has an application to our history. So when someone accuses you of that last part, that the story of Christ is only for the first century Jews, do you believe that? No, you don't. But you're being accused of that. So there's half a lie being portrayed there. So they're telling half truth and half lies about what you believe. I say you because if you just read that, any reasonable person would know that that's crazy. God's interaction with each particular generation is unique to that generation. Of course it is. The way he dealt with God's people in the time of the judges is different to the way he deals with God's people in the time of the kings. The time of the kings, you've got a 490-year probationary time. We know that. The time in the judges, there's no 490 years of probationary time. It's different the way he deals with these generations. Everybody agrees with that. They're correct on that, and hopefully you agree with that. Then they say, has no bearing on the dispensations that come afterwards. That's what they say that you believe, because that's what they say I teach. And if we're all together, do you believe that? No. So it's a false accusation, half right, half wrong. They're testifying that they're actually following Satan because they're using satanic principles. Now, the reason why they want to become fixated about this word dispensationalism is because if you look at the way dispensationalism is understood, the word itself, go and do a YouTube search. If you've all heard of the phrase, the age to come, then if you've heard that term, the age to come. If you haven't, you've certainly heard of this other one, the secret rapture. If you haven't heard of that, you've heard another one, the Left Behind series. So all of those are the same, they're just synonyms of the same idea, the same belief system. That is dispensationalism as apostate Protestants believe. And this is how they ended up doing that. You had these people, the first person, if we could name him, his name would be Darby. And this is around 1830. And then you get someone, I'm only giving two famous people that you probably should have heard. He produced the Darby Bible, it's a famous Bible. And the other one is Scofield, which is the Scofield Bible, which isn't a particular type of Bible, but it's a reference Bible. It's his reference that people really like. And this is around I'll say 100 years, but this is around the 1920s. He produces this book, becomes really rich. It's not a problem on that. But they both produce Bibles, but they both have this belief system, which is what's termed today dispensationalism. Now, there's many facets to dispensationalism, but this is basically what it is. So I'm not going to tell you what they believe, but I'm going to tell you what the end product is. The end product of their belief system is what you see in the United States. Not only in the United States, it's what you see in the Middle East. And not only what you see in the Middle East, it's what you see, or the product of what you see, of what happened after the Second World War in Europe. So you've got a European influence, an American influence, and a Middle Eastern influence. And the focus of attention of all of that, those three geopolitical areas, is one people, one nation. And who is that? It's the Israelites, the Jewish nation, the nation of Israel, literal Jews. So that's the product of these people's work, these scholars, if we can call them that. That's what dispensationalism is. And the way it works is like this. They were reading their Bibles. He reads his Bible, and he's just going to copy his theology. And they're going to go to the Old Testament. And they're going to take those Old Testament promises, and they're going to read them, obviously literally. They're going to go to passages like Habakkuk, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and they're going to see what God is going to promise them after the Babylonian captivity. Was the Babylonian captivity literal? Yeah, it was literal people, a literal nation of Israel. We'll call them the Hebrew people. They were literally put into captivity, and afterwards, God promised that they would come out and everything would be good. And the land of Israel was going to be like what? The Garden of Eden. It was all going to be beautiful. And what these people want to do is they want to take those portions of Scripture after the captivity and they want to make them literal. So they want to use this concept of literalism, but they get a stumbling block because it's okay to talk about the literal Jews. And the problem that they're going to face, so this is the 70-year captivity in Babylon. And afterwards, what are you supposed to have? Eden. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31 to 33. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 33. After those days, these ones here, after the days of captivity, I'm going to promise you that everything's going to be fixed and repaired. The crops are going to grow really well. You're going to be a beautiful people. I'm going to fix you up inside, outside. The land is going to be prosperous. All literal. That's what was promised. Israel was going to be like the land of Eden, the Garden of Eden. What was the problem? They failed. They come out of Babylonian captivity and they fall flat on their face and they go into idolatry. They go into legalism. They get into this huge mess. What follows? Medo-Persian captivity, Grecian captivity, Roman captivity. This is the League of the Romes. They get into alliances with the world because they can't handle living by themselves, following God's rules. So there's a failure here. They fail in receiving the Garden of Eden, of turning Israel, that small plot of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the River Jordan, into a literal Garden of Eden. It doesn't work. So Christ comes and things start going really badly wrong. What goes wrong? The book of Acts. Paul steps in and he makes a mess of all of this plan. So this is plan B. It's an aberration. It's a parenthesis. We'll put it here. It's this small time history. It's not that small. It's around 2,000 years. And what's happening in this time period? I'm going to call it the church. So the church comes now, and the church is basically full of Gentiles. So this story of the church, which becomes a worldwide phenomena, has got nothing to do with all of the fulfillments here in the Old Testament. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we'll go through 2,000 years of history, deal with the church, and then we're going to get back to the real issue. What's the real issue? The Hebrew people, literally. So after the church is dealt with, what does it mean that the church is dealt with? We're all going to go to heaven. Everyone else who isn't fit to go to heaven, the Hebrews and all the rest of the people, where are they going to remain? They're going to remain here on earth. So you're on an airplane, and you shouldn't have Christian pilots piloting the airplane because it's dangerous, or a Christian bus driver, because you're driving along or on the plane and they're going to be secretly raptured away and the plane's going to crash and lots of people are going to die. Okay, so this is real theology. This is what they believe, because it's built upon this idea of literalism. So what's going to happen here? Eden is going to be restored back here on earth. And once Eden's going to be restored back, all these people in heaven, they're going to come back down. It's all going to be a happy family. So this is a really basic overview of what dispensationalism is. And it's all built around the subject of reading inspiration literally. So they call it dispensationalism, but I want to call it literalism. And I want to suggest, if you want to follow parable teaching and you go from literal, here it is, literal, to what? Literal to literal, that is a crime that's punishable by death. It's that serious an issue. If you don't like me saying it that way, a crime punishable by death, I'll give it in a nicer way. It's a life and death message. A life and death message. Maybe that's a nicer way of saying it. If you want a nicer way of saying it, we'll call it the everlasting gospel. There you go. The everlasting gospel. That sounds nicer. The everlasting gospel is a prophetic testing message that creates two classes of people. One of them believes what? One of them's going to go to death. We agree with that. One's going to go to life. We agree with that. Two streams. The one who goes to death, what is their crime? Literal to literal. So if that's their crime, what's the saving grace and what's the means by which the other group are saved? The ones who accept the everlasting gospel. Where would they begin their journey? They're going to go to the Old Testament, because that's where you're always going to start. They're going to go from literal to spiritual. It's that easy. This movement, this message just teaches one thing. If you stick in literalism, which apostate Protestants call dispensationalism, then you're going to die because you reject the everlasting gospel. But this doesn't look like the everlasting gospel that you know, because you have different ways of explaining it. What does this look like? This one here. When you go from literal to spiritual. This is parable teaching. And you can clearly show from Numbers chapter 23 and chapter 24, using some of the principles, the rules of prophetic interpretation that we use, that the first time the word parable is ever used in the scriptures is by Balaam. And when he uses it, he says, I'm going to take up my parable What's he talking about? He's talking about something that's about to happen, a prediction. What is another word for prediction? Prophecy. So you know that parable is prophecy. And if you weren't sure about that, you can actually go into spirit prophecy. I think you just need to type in the word Balaam and type in the word prophecy, and you'll see that she's going to take you back to Numbers 23 and 24, where in the Bible it doesn't say the word prophecy, it says the word parable, but Ellen White says it's the word prophecy. So she's going to, using proof texting methodology, she's going to put these two things together, and she's going to proof text to you that parables are prophecy. Prophecy, by definition, means that you have to take a literal story and you have to understand it at the end of the world spiritually, which means it will not look the same. And that's where the problems begin to arise in this movement, where we begin to separate. So, those people who believe in half right and half wrong, half truth, half lies, are the ones that are following Satan. Now, I'm not going to be silly and say that, they're Satan worshippers and all that kind of stuff. Let's be serious about this, intelligent. This is a Bible study. You can clearly see what this is teaching. You ask yourself the question, if someone accuses you and they give half truths and half lies in their accusation against you, which side would you put them on? It's easy to see. So we can establish that about people who do half right and half wrong. That's easy enough to see. So the reason why this becomes problematic is because this is the third time, at least, and it's counting, that this has happened. They did the same thing with Wagner and Butler. Then they did this same thing with Sister Angelica, or Mother Angelica, if I can use that symbol to talk about this issue, half right and half wrong, and now they're doing it again on the subject of dispensationalism. The reason why this becomes so important is because what Future for America want to do, they want to persuade you to believe in this issue, that in the dispensation or the time period here from 1989 to the National Sunday Law. This is 1141 and this is 1140 Part B. That this is the close of probation and this is 12:1. We're okay with that? Daniel 12:1, Michael stands up. Close of probation. What they want you to believe is that we live today here in 2019. This is what they want you to believe. Is that true? Do we really live here in 2019? It's true. They want you to believe that that is the case, and it's true. For sure it's correct. But they also want you to believe that here in 2019, and even though I don't think they've fully clarified it, that from November 19 to January 20, but even if you just take November, at this point, you have a close of probation. They say there's a close of probation November the 9th. Do you believe that to be true? Yes. So now comes the problem. What they want you to believe, after teaching all this truth, is that Michael is going to stand up for you. Michael's going to stand up for you, so they're going to take this waymark and they're going to bring it here into this history, and they're going to say, this is Daniel 12:1. And they want you to swallow that pill. They want you to believe that Michael's going to stand up for you here, because what they want to claim is that I'm teaching gross error. And I tell you what the gross error that I'm teaching, according to them. They want to say this. The subject close of probation, November the 9th, 2019, has been semi-hijacked by me. I've hijacked that theology. Do you know what hijacking means? This is someone's car, and it's the owner who drives that car. So the owner drives that car, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to whiz past him or stand in front of him. I'm going to make him stop. I'm going to hijack his car. That means someone else must own that property. So if I've hijacked it, that means November the 9th must have been owned by someone else. Who do you think the someone else would be if there's this movement and them? They're taking possession of November the 9th. This is just a soft touch of saying November the 9th was invented or owned, or it's the property of Future for America and their followers, not the property of this movement. They'll say it in much stronger language. The sister Tess, when she claims that she discovered that through the Lord's instruction, and when I say she, I hope we can be mature enough to understand what I mean by that, that she's the one that brought November the 9th to this movement. They see that as a red flag because they see that as Gadal. And they say, we know that there are plenty of other people who brought November the 9th. There are plenty of people who saw November the 9th before she ever introduced it in October 2018. Plenty of people, at least a couple. I shouldn't say plenty, don't want to exaggerate. So they want to take possession of this, which is why we can hijack it. This subject has been semi-hijacked by Parminder. Parminder introduced the concept of 4 closes of probation. I know people have struggled with this, even in our class. 1 for the priests, 1 for the Levites, 1 for the Nethinims, and 1 for the 144,000. This is error. There are 3 closes of probation, according to him. Raphia for the priest, point in time. Then the Levites, period of time, Panium, to the Sunday law. Then the third one, Sunday law to Michael standing up, 12:1. Once Parminder had that concept floating around, which is the 4 closes of probation, the next confused discussion was about whether there would be any further mediation for the priests after the door closed at Raphia. Mediation means Christ intercedes for you. I'm saying here on November the 10th, 11th, 12th, into January, all the way into 2020, 2021 and beyond, Christ will still be mediating for you. So that we're explicitly clear on that. So he says, there's confusion introduced, whether there would be any mediation for the priest after the closed door at Raphia. This is the essence of this line of questioning taking place in their discussions. Can we sin and repent after Raphia? How simple is that to understand? They say no. We say yes. If you say no, it cannot happen, what would happen if you sinned after that? You're lost because there's no more mediation. When does mediation stop? It's Revelation 22 verse 11. That's here. 22:11. 2 doublings. So they want to take this experience and want to bring it down here for the history of the priests. Whether you're good or bad, it's all too late. If you're righteous, you'll remain righteous. If you're unrighteous, you're going to remain unrighteous. So ask yourself the question, do you believe that after this experience, you haven't even got to the Sunday law, by the way, that your probation has closed? You know why they can believe that? Because they go to this kind of place, Last Day Events, page 227, paragraph 1, which is taken from Second Selected Messages, page 81, which is dealing with the false visions of Anna, can't remember her last name. What they're going to do is going to say the great test for God's people is before the Sunday law. So the Sunday law, Daniel 11 verse 41, is not the great test, because you have to have a great test in order to be tested, in order for a decision to be made whether you pass the test or not, don't you? So if this is your close of probation, you're going to have a great test before November the 9th, 2019. And they don't believe in 2014 the way we believe it. So where's your great test? Yeah, you haven't got many places to go. They haven't even developed and refined these studies properly because it's just a mishmash. They're going to be forced to go to 9/11. They're going to undo everything that has been taught over the last 12 and even longer months, 24 for certain. So what they want you to believe, that in the time period before the Sunday law, the close of probation happens for a group of people, for anyone, it doesn't matter who they were. Think about that. This is the former rain. This is the latter rain. We discussed this all the way here. 2019 is here. We're in the history of the former rain. They want to tell you, before you've even developed immature fruit, it's not even ripe fruit yet, you're immature fruit because you haven't had any latter rain, and your probation's closed. You haven't even confronted or dealt with the Sunday law issue, however they want to understand that Sunday law issue. So I want us to see how crazy a position that they hold. Now, if that's the close of probation, they will tell you what the second advent is. Because you can't have a close of probation, Daniel 12:1, mediation stopping, without having it in a framework. So what would the framework be if Raphia is the close of probation? What would the framework for the second advent be? It would be Panium. Think about the stupidity of that statement. Whenever they want Panium to be, and they believe it to be July 18th, 2020, going all the way to December the 25th, 2021, it's a period of time, regardless of what that is, Panium is between 2020 and 2021. Does that mean Christ is going to come back? Of course he would. How would he come back? It'd be like a secret rapture, wouldn't it? They're giving you straight in your face that they believe in dispensationalism, not us. We're not dealing with literalism. They're dealing with literalism. They want to take literal stories and bring it here and make this a literal close of probation. So if you're going to make it literal close of probation, what does Panium become? Panium cannot be a literal second advent, so they're going to make it a spiritual advent, or they're going to have to, in fact, try and whitewash all of that away. The whole message that they have is it's just a jungled mess. They're making one waymark in the line of the priest literal. They're going to be forced to make the other one not literal. It all becomes a confused mess. You cannot have a close of probation in the former rain. It's impossible for that to happen. It's all false. Which leads us to another point that they keep on accusing us of, is that the Sunday law, is it something to do with Sabbath and Sunday, or is it something else? What is the mark of the beast? And their argument's going to go something like this. In 321, the mark of the beast's authority was literally what? Sunday. At the church council in Orleans, 538, France, what was the mark of their authority? Sunday sacredness. Literal and literal. What they want to do is take those two literal stories, bring them to the end of the world and do what? They want to go from literal to literal. If you go from literal to literal, you are into dispensationalism. You're going to take literal stories in the past and bring them literally into the future. You're going to fail the test. This is what they're doing. So if anybody wants to be labeled with the title of apostate Protestant dispensationalism, which basically is the story of literalism, you take literal stories and they have to be literally fulfilled at the end of the world. It's future for America, and the people who follow them, they're the ones that are going down this route. I wholly reject that. I want to state categorically that the end does not look like the beginning. It never has, it never will. The end of ancient Israel did not look like the beginning of ancient Israel. Ellen White says, scenes similar to this, GC 343. All of those histories have repeating patterns. 3 steps, first, second, and third angels' messages. They all have time of the ends. They all have close of probations. They all have similar properties or characteristics, but they do not look the same. It's easy to see that. Ellen White will teach you that. You go to the time of Christ here, which is the beginning of the Christian dispensation. Does this history of Christ, which is the former rain, look like the latter rain? Of course it doesn't, because the former rain is where plants germinate. The latter rain is when they come to maturity. They're not the same experience. So you know they're not the same. They have similar characteristics and similar properties. They appear to have similarities to be the same, but they don't look the same. So you can't go from literal to literal. It's so easy to see this the more you look. They've got a complete jumbled up theology, methodology. It just doesn't make sense. Do you believe that the way God deals with his people is always the same? Of course you do. They teach it isn't. They don't explicitly say that. They say, yeah, we believe that as well, but they don't. Because what's the great test is your probation's closed here. It's not the Sunday law. It's something that's come before. So your great test was something before 9/11 or something else. What's the great test? What they would call for the world. Daniel 11 verse 41, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, the Sunday law. So you've got different tests. We don't teach that. We do not teach that you have different tests. We stick by the rules. This is why it's essential to understand these lines as 4 sequential steps. The priests, Levites, Nethinims, and the 144,000. And the 144,000 is not a separate group of people. The 144,000 is another symbol for the priests, or the priests are another symbol for the 144,000. The priests are a symbol of the 144,000 when they go through their initial steps. Because if you want to ask Ellen White, what do you want to ask Ellen White? What are the steps that the 144,000 go through? She's going to tell you, I don't know. She has no idea what the initial steps are. However, God in his wisdom has coded that information in his written word, unbeknownst to his prophets. He's done that through the words, and he's done that through the structure. So he has coded into his words 1989 and 9/11. Ellen White does not know that, and Daniel didn't know that. They were not aware of that. So he's coded into their stories, that information. So when we want to start dealing with the 144,000, Ellen White's going to give you some commentary on that, and her commentary is this part of the history. 144,000, she'll tell you about this. If you go to John, the Revelator, he'll tell you about it as well. He'll tell you the experience of the 144,000. It's all contained in this history, post-Sunday law, which is not much help for us. Why is it not much help? Because this is the history of the latter rain. In order to pass through the latter rain, what do you need to experience first and have passed through? The former rain. Now, Ellen White will give all of that story in the framework of a moral experience. She'll say, if you are messing around here, don't expect the latter rain to fix you up, because it's not going to work. The latter rain is used for what purpose? For public evangelism. To go and do a work for someone else, not to do a work for yourself. The work for yourself is here in this history, in this preparation time. Now we know the 144,000, the final generation, so she doesn't give you the start date. It's right here. Daniel gives you the start date. It's hidden within the words through a structural understanding of verse 40, which we have uncoded and discovered. So we have this history here from 1989, and this is the history of which group of people? It's the 144,000. This is the information that you need to know in how to prepare for doing this work, which we would call public evangelism. We could divide this into two parts. Public evangelism part 1, and here is the finishing work, which is the 7 last plays, of how you testify to people about who and what you are. But you need to prepare for it in this history. And there's no information here. Ellen White tells you that no human being knows when that's going to happen, how it's going to happen, or what it's going to look like, until we came about, till this movement was created. And then this movement has, piece by piece, systematically over the past 30 years, worked out what this looks like. And what we have chosen to do through our study of inspiration is not call this 144 Part A, 144 Part B, and 144 Part C. What we chose to call it is the history of the priests. The history of the priests is the history of the 144,000 and how they prepared themselves from the time of the end to the Sunday law. That's what it's doing. That's what that history is. And how do you know it's correct? How do you know it's not all made up? How do you know we didn't make a mistake? At some point we say, you know, here, we're okay at the beginning, but we might have made a mistake somewhere there. How do you know that point is correct? 2014. The experience of 2014 for the priest, which is some kind of experience that the 144,000 go through, how do you know that's correct? We should all be able to know the answer to that, how you know it's correct. Because either we just made something up, we plucked it out of thin air. We did some mathematical calculation. We did a mathematical calculation, we said, you know, there's 2,691 days, divide it by 5, times it by 12, turn it from a Karaite reckoning into rabbinical reckoning, and we came up with this magical date. We didn't do it that way, because that's the methodology that FFA currently use. The way we know that these dates, these waymarks are sure, is because we use the principle of repeating patterns. Repeating patterns, we call them fractals. That's how we know, because we're going to take this whole history and we're going to squash it into this history here, into 144,000 Part A, and it will explain to us and it will prove to us what those steps look like. So someone comes up with some number, 2014, and you're going to say, well, how do you know it's right? You don't know it's right because you did some random calculation. You know it's correct because it has a repeating pattern. And the repeating pattern that it has is this one here. And we know that this one is correct, big ticks, because it's given through the spirit of prophecy. We didn't make that one up. And that's why we know that these waymarks are correct. That's what we know. That's why we know that the history of the priest is solid, is correct, and what those things mean. So you can't just trash 2014 when we say it's the Sunday law. It is correct, it is true, because it's a mini version, a mini pattern of this large line, and that's why we call this the Sunday law, because it's a repeating pattern. But the history of the priest is nothing more than the preparatory time period for the 144,000. So when they say there's these 4 groups, but we say there's these 4 groups, but there's really 3. We teach that there are only 3 groups. We showed that the other day. Priests, Levites, Samaritans. There's only 3 groups. You can go over and over again and see there's only 3 groups. That's not the point. That's easy to see. The story of the 144,000 is not the story of a new group of people. It's the story of the second part, or the continuation of the experience of the priests. That's what that storyline is. And even though we might not fully be able to grasp all of these issues because it may be just information overload to you, to say that there are just 3 groups, priests, Levites, and Nethinims, and ignore this line, which is where everything comes from, because that's what they're going to have to do, You end up cutting short your line here because the story of the Nethinims ends at Daniel 12:1. It doesn't carry on. If it carried on, that means they're going to go where? Into translation. The Future for America don't believe that they're going to be translated, just like we don't believe they're going to be translated. We don't have a narrative to know exactly what their ending will be and what it will look like, but we don't believe they're going to have the same experience of the 144,000. We're in agreement on that issue. So if the story ends here, what happens to this bit at the end? Where does that come from? It doesn't come from the line of the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. It comes from this line here, the line of the 144,000, which is the line of the priests. Now, these might seem convoluted arguments, but they're not. There are some simple things to see. You can't go from literal to literal. This is literalism. This is dispensationalism, as apostate Protestants believe. The Adventist Church believes what kind of theology? Apostate Protestantism. It's not the whole package. They take selective portions of it. The primary one that they take is that there's no time, and the other one that they love to hold on to is the story of literalism. They're going to take Ellen White's quotes and they're going to take them literally. The great controversy. There's a literal Sunday law. 538, literal Sunday law. 321, literal Sunday law. Take those literal Sunday laws and they say at the end of the world, it's going to be a literal Sunday law. It can't be. This is just one argument to prove that. God's dealing with many is ever the same. If God's going to deal with us one way, he has to deal with the world the same way. If this is true, hard close of probation, there's no point in even having a Sunday law test. It's not the great test, because the great test comes before close of probation. This is 2019 for people who follow FFA. If they're watching, ask yourselves, what is your great test? Because you don't believe it's 2014. So it must be something else. That's your great test. That's not the great test for the Levites or the Nethinims. The Nethinims don't even exist in 9/11, 2001. They haven't even begun their journey until 13 years afterwards. So our test is different to the test of the world. Think about how wrong that is, how many rules that's breaking. Over and over again, you can see that this is not working. They have an incoherent message because they are not following the lines of that are shown here. There's so much more that we could say. I've run out of time. But what I want us to go away with is this idea. Whichever side of the argument you stand on, whether you follow FFA or you're in the valley of decision or you're fully on the right side of these things, you need to know one thing. Despite their accusations, Future for America and the differences that they now hold to are not some minor issues. It's not like that they're just saying, we are false prophets or we are being led by Satan. All of that is just inflammatory language. Not worried about that. I didn't want that to say that these are Satan worshippers. Just trying to make a point there. I'm not trying to say that. But what I want us to see is that within 2 short months, they began their first presentation, the beginning of September. You've got September, October. In 2 short months, they have completely undone not only everything that we teach, but everything that they taught themselves since around 2014. And because 2014 was built upon all this previous history, they're actually undoing and dismantling their own belief system, their own truths, way back from the time of the end. They're in free fall. And even though, if you read their statements or watch their presentations, they're given with force and they're interspersed with large spirit of prophecy quotes to make some points, I want us to see that that is not the case. That they're actually so far away from the truth, they are no longer recoverable. They've gone so far, there's no possibility of recovering themselves. Now, what I don't want to do is introduce people's names into this story. You introduce the names by yourself, but I want to read something to you. If I can find it. So we read from Second Selected Messages here. Remember we read that? I've been shown that the image of the beast is going to be set up before the close of probation. I just want to read that in its original context. Second Selected Messages, page 80. This is a communication to someone called Mr. Garmire. Mr. Garmire. This was written in 1890. You know, 1888, 2 years later, 1890. So there's this woman, I think her name is Anna Phillips, something like that. I think it's Phillips. Yeah, Anna Phillips. She used to be a worker for Ellen White. She had these false visions. Ellen White said, this is false. She repented and she became a faithful worker. This is Second Selected Messages. I'm going to read from page 80, paragraph 1. 2SM 80.1. Mr. Garmire, is one of Anna Phillips' followers. He listens to her false prophecies and he says, you know, this all sounds great. I'm going to accept this. I'm just going to read a commentary from the compilers. 1893, Anna Phillips, a young woman residing in Battle Creek, was led to believe that her impressions and dreams were the intimations of the Spirit of God. She was encouraged in her work when her so-called testimonies, placed in the hands of a leading worker, that's Mr. Garmire, were read by him before the Battle Creek Church as divinely inspired communications. The next morning, this worker received a communication here presented. On hearing this read, Anna Phillips discerned and acknowledged the delusion, repudiated her past work, and became a trusted, faithful Bible instructor. So she ended up becoming good. So this is the comment to Mr. Garmire. So see if you can put some names into here if you want to, because I'm not going to do it. See if things are working out for you. All I want us to do as we do this, now, we know that if there's a false prophet, so if there's a true prophet, there's going to be a false prophet. If there's a true midnight cry message, there's going to be a false midnight cry message. Sister Tess presented that earlier on. At the Exeter camp meeting, how many tents do you have? 2 tents. The tent from Watertown and the tent where Samuel Snow is going to be giving his message. And in fact, those people were giving a message. There were sermons, etc. They had a band. We would call it a rock band today. It was a jazz band then. And we had these 2 competing messages. True message, false message. So I want us to understand that there are true and false prophets. In this story, the true prophet is Ellen White. The false prophet is Anna Phillips. And you've got people supporting her. Since visiting your house, talking to Mr. Garmire, August 23rd, some things have rested on my mind to say to you. I have no hesitancy in saying that Anna's visions are not of God. Anna is a false prophet. If you go to the story of the New Testament, inside the church there are true prophets. There's Paul, who's the prophet, the true prophet. Who's the false prophet? Simon Magus. There are 2 prophets, the false and the true prophets. I want us to know that. And Paul is living in what time period? The time period of the loud cry, the midnight cry, or the Sunday law history. So in the Sunday law history, you should expect how many prophets? 2 prophets. A true prophet and a false prophet. You've got it within this story. So I want us to think internally in the movement, in the church, you should have 2 prophets. So you need to understand who's the true prophet that's giving the true midnight cry and the false prophet who's giving the false midnight cry. Because one of the arguments we read in Elder Jeff's comment is that I've hijacked November the 9th, which means, and he says that explicitly in other places, that there are other people who gave the midnight cry message. So you've either got the true prophet or the false prophet. So I want us to see that there's one person who's going to give the midnight cry message and everyone else is false prophet. You work out who the false prophet is. I have no hesitancy in saying that Anna's visions are not of God. The dreams that the members of your family have had are a deception of Satan. Satan saw that he could work upon your faith, your fruitful imagination, and lead you with others into his net. Did God give you that time message? No, for no such message comes from the true source of light. Time has proved you to be a false prophet, and Anna's visions, false exercises. God never works in this way. So the false prophet is going to have what? A message on time. So there's going to be a false message on time. There's going to be a true message on time. You need to work out what is the false methodology on time setting and the true methodology on time setting. Because there's two different methodologies which are going to give two different ways of understanding time. One is going to be a false and one is going to be a true. Can we see that? So when we start dealing in our movement, Future for America are going to have lots of time setting. You should expect that. Don't expect them to have no time and say, we don't believe in time, we're the faithful ones. No. The false prophets are going to have time and the true prophets are going to have time. You need to work out which is the correct way to understand and interpret time. We're saying clearly, we don't know time in the future until you get to a certain dispensation. When you get into the dispensation, you know the time. Another way of expressing that is the formalization of the message or the midnight cry, the loud cry. It's in the loud cry 2012, 2018 that you understand the time for that dispensation. You can't jump ahead of yourself and know dates. Future for America say you can. Two different ways to understand dates. Anna is going to use time setting in a false way. Satan has other and stronger delusions prepared for you. You will claim, if you have not already done so, that you have a work to do in connection with Anna's visions, corresponding to that of the mighty angel that came down from heaven. Who's the angel that came down from heaven? Revelation 18. You've got a message to do with Revelation 18. It's a false message that they're going to have. This group of people, Mr. Garmire, that's who she's writing to. He is a supporter. He is upholding whom? The false prophet. The false prophet is the one that uses methodology the wrong way to support their false prophecy. You figure out who Mr. Garmire is today, because he's going to be having a false understanding connected with the full time setting of the work of the second angel. You know that there's an argument about the work of the second angel, who the second angel is, and when they're going to be introduced. If you go back to the study the Sister Tess did last Sabbath, Future for America are now teaching that the second messenger, Christ, is going to come when? At Panium, not at 9/11, way in the future. Christ is a second angel, so they're going to be dealing with the second angel and they're moving it, which is exactly what the context here is. Corresponding to that mighty angel that came down from heaven, whose glory lightened the earth, Satan sees that your mind is already to be impressed with his suggestions, and he will use you to your own ruin unless in the name of the Lord you break the shackles that bind you. Several times during our conversations in which you became very much in earnest, you repeated the sentence, "O consistency, thou art a jewel." I repeat the same with decided force to you. You say that Anna's visions place the forming of the image of the beast after probation closes. That's what this is dealing with. This is not so. You claim to believe the testimonies. Let me set you right on this point. The Lord has shown me clearly that the image of the beast will be formed before probation closes, for it is to be the great test for the people of God by which the eternal destiny will be decided. What is she connected? The great test with what? With the angel of Revelation 18 that comes down, that lightens the earth with its glory. You need to figure out what the great test that she's referring to. It's the Sunday law. The Sunday law is the great test, and that's when the angel of Revelation 18 comes down. They want to have you believe that they're going to move it. The image of the beast, which they say is the great test, would be what way, Mark? 9/11. Can you see why they've taken you in a direction which is just pure false? Because they're following Anna Phillips, who uses time setting incorrectly. Your position is such a jumble of inconsistencies that but few will be deceived. You have taken the history of the disobedient prophet as given in the Old Testament and applied it to Sister White, the true prophet. You say she is perfectly honest, but the deceived prophet. For this reason, the testimonies of the Spirit of God can have no effect on you. Has the Lord opened to you or your daughter or your wife or your children the disobedience of Sister White? Has God shown you, your daughter, your wife, your children, that Sister White, the true prophet, is false? if she has walked contrary to God, will you show in what? My duty is to make plain statements of my position, for you misinterpret my testimony, wrench it from its true meaning, and ring in my name whenever you think it will enforce whatever you have to say. But when the testimonies do not harmonize with your theories, I am excused because I am a false prophet. There are many ways of evading the truth. You seem to have special bitterness against someone else. She goes on into this person's experience. I want to suggest that the experience of Mr. Garmire, as he's going to be dealing with the great test, with the angel of Revelation 18, with the false methodology of time setting, dealing with the false prophet Anna Phillips, who would be Simon Magus in the time period of the midnight cry, is today being fulfilled. There are true prophets and there are false prophets that are vying for your attention. You need to know who those people are. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we want to give you thanks for your goodness and mercy as we realize the solemn times in which we're living. Only 2 short days before the destiny of each of us changes irrevocably. It's our hope and our prayer that each of us stand on the right side of these issues, that we understand the work of Christ in the most holy place and what he is doing for us, through us, and in us. Help us to have a correct understanding of these lines. May we be able to discern between Ellen White and Anna Phillips. Please be with us. Please guide us. We ask and pray in the precious holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen.